Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering woke video game flop Suicide Squad destroys entire company. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, I really appreciate you guys. Coming from Cosmic Book News, Warner Bros. Discovery shutting down Rocksteady following Suicide Squad game failure. And from Bloomberg, behind Suicide Squad, the year's biggest video game flop. After 7 years of development, Warner Bros. Took a $200 million loss on the Rocksteady game. This could be the end of the entire studio. This company also utilized Sweet Baby Inc., a company known for putting diversity, equity, and inclusion into video games. As you can imagine, putting diversity, equity, and inclusion into video games doesn't sell more video games, it sells less video games. Sweet Baby Inc., what do they actually do? Founded by former Ubisoft developers, the company consults on video game narratives during development to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion within game narratives and studios. And that'll tell you what happened to this game. But it wasn't just that. They also mismanaged the entire development and production process of this game, which should be impossible given that the studio has produced hits before. But it's never impossible to mismanage something. Let's get into it. From Bloomberg, behind Suicide Squad, the year's biggest video game flop. David Haddad, the head of video games for Warner Bros. Discovery, visited the London offices of subsidiary Rocksteady Studios in mid-February for an all-hands-on meeting, while previous gatherings with the executive had been peppered with tactful euphemisms. This time, Haddad was blunt. Weeks after its release, the studio's latest game, Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, was tanking. Haddad shared few details on the exact scope of the Suicide Squad misfire, but it didn't take long for people to find out the extent of the damage. On May 9, 2024, during an earnings call, Warner Bros. Revealed that it was taking a $200 million loss on Suicide Squad, making it one of the gaming world's worst blunders. Behind the scenes, according to interviews with nearly 24 people who requested anonymity because they weren't authorized to speak to the press, the development of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League was a tumultuous affair, plagued with countless delays. The game failed for a number of reasons, said the people, including a constantly shifting vision, a culture of rigid perfectionism, and a genre pivot that was ill-suited for the studio. This flop was so severe it could damage the entire video game industry. The costly miss could extend beyond Warner Bros. And further deter investment in gaming by traditional media firms when they should be expanding, according to a professor who teaches the video game business at New York University. The high-profile failure came at a particularly bad time for Warner Bros. Chief Executive David Zaslav. The parent company of CNN, HBO, TNT, and other cable networks was already grappling with challenges on multiple fronts, from plunging TV ad sales and struggling movie theaters to escalating sports rights fees and growing threats from AI. Over the past 2 years, the company's share price has plummeted from $26 in April 2022 to a little over $8 on the day of the call. And what's really holding down the stock price for Warner Bros. Discovery is their massive debt. They took on massive debt to acquire the Warner Bros. Studio. They've paid down a lot of the debt. Their debt currently is at $42.5 billion, down 13% from just 2 years prior. And their cash on hand is almost $3 billion, an increase of over 14% from the previous year, but it's the debt that really holds them back. As that debt gets paid down, the company is worth more money. But if they're going to blow $200 million on one single video game, it also brings into question the value of all their DC Comics franchises. The games division was supposed to be a rare bright spot for Zaslav and his investors. For Warner Bros., it was a painful reminder that big, ambitious video games like blockbuster-style movies have the potential to amass both huge windfalls and gaping losses. On the call, Zaslav described it as a disappointing release that overshadowed the rest of the quarter. For years, Warner Bros. Has been struggling to transform its DC Comics assets into a wellspring of recurring hits, much as Disney has done with Marvel Comics. In August 2016, Warner Bros. Released Suicide Squad, a gory sci-fi action movie based on the comic book series, which originated in 1959. The film, starring Will Smith and Margot Robbie, featured a platoon of villains strong-armed by the U.S. government into a dangerous mission to save the world. It went on to generate ticket sales of $750 million on a budget of $175 million, a major boon for the studio, and a great statement about the value of DC Comics properties to be its own successful DCU, DC Comics universe, to compete with the MCU, which of course since has destroyed itself, that's another whole story. Afterward, the company hustled to build on the momentum of Suicide Squad. At its gaming studio in Montreal, Warner Brothers already had a Suicide Squad video game that was struggling to gel. With the stakes heightened, Haddad pulled the plug and turned instead to the most prestigious of the company's dozen video game studios. Founded in London in 2004, Rocksteady had grown into an industry darling thanks to Batman Arkham, a series of games that was revered by critics and sold millions of copies. Following Rocksteady's third and final installment, which came out in 2015, the studio's co-founders, Jamie Walker and Sefton Hill, eager to do something different, started working on a prototype of an original multiplayer puzzle-solving game codenamed Stones. Around the end of 2016, Walker and Hill told their staff there'd been a change of plans. Stones was out, Suicide Squad was in. Hill explained that he saw it as a better opportunity than making something new from scratch, and that the company hoped to release the game in 2019 or 2020. At the time, the broader industry was increasingly fixated on games as a service, such as Destiny and League of Legends, which generate sales long after their initial release, continuously re-engaging players with endless updates and raking in fresh profits year after year. So the game becomes a platform with engaged users and engaged customers, and they can continue to sell those same customers. It's a great concept when it works. Armed with a battery of presentations, Warner Brothers executives traveled to London and made the case that the growing category was the industry's future. It was a field in which Rocksteady had no prior experience. The Batman Arkham games were all single-player. Even so, Rocksteady executives soon decided that, in keeping with their present company's newfound enthusiasm, Suicide Squad would become an online multiplayer game with live service content. That decision to go ahead and say, hey, yeah, this is the future, let's just do this instead, is a big issue. They needed to have at least a couple of key people that really understood that transition. I'm not going to tell you that I understand how it works. What I'm going to tell you is there are people that understand how it works. What you do is you go find them and pay them a ton of money. If you don't do that and you're going to speculatively produce something that costs tremendous amounts of money to produce with tremendous stakes involved, stakes where if it doesn't work, you could crash your entire studio, you can't do that kind of stuff. Go get somebody with experience to make sure what you're producing actually is worth producing. Also, as you see later in this article, people working on it got confused. They were like, wait, what are we doing? Why does this make sense? And in a lot of cases, the decisions they made didn't actually make sense because they didn't understand the format of what it was they were trying to produce. And then on top of that, they bring in the sweet baby people to get diversity, equity, and inclusion feedback just to make sure if anybody was actually interested in the characters and was willing to be patient with the development of the game, as they really didn't know how to do these live service games, they made sure those people would be turned off. As it set out to master a new set of skills, Rocksteady expanded. Over the next 7 years, it would swell from roughly 160 to more than 250 people, a size that grew unwieldy for managers, yet still remained far smaller than enormous teams behind similar games such as Destiny. And why could the people who put together Destiny manage more people than the people who are putting together the Suicide Squad game? Well, because the managers had experience with dealing with those larger teams. It's one thing to manage 3 people or 5 people or even 25 people under one manager. When you increase that number significantly, it gets a lot more complicated. And it doesn't matter what the business is. It doesn't matter what the product is. Management is its own skill separate from the production of the game. During the early days, the studio kept its work on Suicide Squad a secret, even from potential hires. Several people who came on board during this era said they were surprised when they first arrived at the offices to learn they'd be working on a multiplayer game, not at all what Rocksteady was known for. Many would depart as a result. Over time, the leader's vision kept morphing, most notably switching from an emphasis on melee combat to heavily focusing on guns. The change left some staff members wondering why protagonists such as Captain Boomerang, known for fighting with his actual boomerang, would suddenly pivot to gunplay. In August 2020, after 3 years and multiple delays, Rocksteady finally revealed its plans, telling fans Suicide Squad would be released in 2022. But additional frustrations kept piling up. The project's massive world and 4 playable heroes were a significant increase in complexity from the Arkham games. Engineers, under the impression they were rushing toward an immutable deadline, prioritized short-term fixes that later proved to be hindrances as the release date kept getting pushed back. Staff members sometimes waited weeks or months for Hill, the studio's perfectionist co-founder and director of the game, to review their work, creating a bottleneck that further slowed development. He scrapped big chunks of the script and struggled to convey his evolving ideas, confessing that he hadn't spent much time with competing games such as Destiny, so he didn't even understand the format of the game they were trying to produce. The constant delays hurt morale and led staff to fret that they were discarding too much and failing to make real progress. Because you can spend months working on something, but then if your boss doesn't check it and approve it, you don't even know while you're working on it, while you're killing yourself to make a deadline, if what you're doing is actually going to show up in the finished product. Eventually, your boss might look at it and then say, yeah, this is fine, let's use it. Or they might say, no, we're not going to use it. But during that time, the entire studio is trying to keep their morale up, trying to meet deadlines, and not even knowing what they're working on is going to help them meet that deadline because the boss hasn't approved the material. This is really, really poor production management. And it's also completely unnecessary. It doesn't save the company any money. It doesn't make the company any more profits. It doesn't even protect them from any losses. It's just poor management. It's like not returning emails when you know people are waiting on your response. At one point, Hill pitched an elaborate system of vehicles that would allow players to deck out cars with weapons and navigate through the game's alien-infested streets. But each of the 4 playable characters were already outfitted with modes of traveling, leading to more doubts among staffers. Why, they wondered, would players using Deadshot or King Shark bother with a motorcycle when they could just soar through the air? After months of experimentation and prototyping, the vehicle system was scrapped. One of the biggest issues was that the battles, levels, and bosses in a live service game needed to be designed so players could tackle them over and over again, while Rocksteady was accustomed to telling stories that were only experienced once. Hampered by bloated code, the team struggled to find ways to make these activities feel less tedious and repetitive. Multiple people who worked on the project say their growing concerns were often met with promises from management that Suicide Squad would eventually coalesce at the last minute, just as the Arkham games had. Several employees adopted the term toxic positivity to describe, which I've never heard that term before, that's a great term, to describe the culture of the company, which discouraged criticism. Leadership didn't seem worried, they say. Even as other traditionally single-player game studios that chased the live service trend were delivering abysmal results with games such as Anthem, which earned a lowly score of 59 out of 100 on Metacritic, Marvel's Avengers, 67 out of 100, and Redfall, 56 out of 100. Despite the internal concerns among frontline workers, executives from Warner Bros. Kept reviewing demonstrations of the game and sending laudatory feedback, praising the graphics and saying they expected Suicide Squad to become a billion-dollar franchise. They apparently assumed that the managers at Rocksteady, who already had produced successful work, knew what they were doing. They already had a success with a Batman game. Why couldn't they do something like this? Because neither Warner Bros. Or Rocksteady understood the format of the live service game. Any experienced people who understood the format of the game could have looked at that work in progress and said, what you think is good is actually not going to work. We need to stop what we're doing and reevaluate. And that's what they needed to do rather than push out this massive loss. Whatever the outcome, the studio's co-founders wouldn't be there to see it through. In the fall of 2022, Warner Bros. Announced that Hill and Walker were leaving Rocksteady to work on a new adventure, and that a pair of longtime employees were being promoted in their wake. The change in leadership shocked the Rocksteady staff, and Hill and Walker said little in public to elaborate on their reasons for leaving. Later, when they started a new studio called 100 Star Games, they told potential recruits from Rocksteady that they would have the opportunity to make a game free of the mandates and pressures from a corporation like Warner Bros. Not long after the pair left, Suicide Squad was shown to the world for the first time in a digital PlayStation showcase that revealed 10 minutes of footage. Fans were largely unimpressed and slammed the preview for looking generic and repetitive. One Forbes writer described it as live service hell. Warner delayed the release again, leading fans to wonder if Rocksteady might pivot away from the uninspired looter-shooter genre to something else entirely, but it was too late. In February 2024, Rocksteady released Suicide Squad. Employees were hopeful that players might enjoy individual pieces, such as its beautiful graphics or clever banter. But critics panned the overall experience, ranking it alongside other live service flops with a 60 out of 100 on Metacritic. and the game failed to reach a wide audience despite a pricey marketing campaign that included network TV commercials. Despite the massive setback, Warner Bros. Isn't giving up on video games, a $262 billion global industry predicted to grow to $312 billion in 2027. During the February meeting in London, Haddad said that Warner Bros. Games was looking to do more collaboration between its dozen studios and that the company was understaffed compared to competing publishers, so job cuts at Rocksteady wouldn't make sense. However, many of the studio's employees are now helping to develop a new director's cut version of Hogwarts Legacy. Why use Rocksteady's employees to develop a director's cut version of Hogwarts Legacy? Because that's guaranteed money. That's easy money. They're obviously not looking forward to trying to do another Suicide Squad game again. They're not trying to lose another $200 million. In the meantime, if they can use the labor at one of their other game studios, why not use that labor for that? Much easier for them to control, much easier for them to make sure they make a profit out of that work. That's low risk, that's no risk. The rumor is they're going to shut down the entire Rocksteady studio, or they may just decide to not give it any new projects. Let it do additional work on other studios' work, but don't let these guys make another massive mistake with a game they don't know how to produce. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.